Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to do a review of what I call the lost years of Ringo's star. A lot of people talk about John Lennon's Lost Weekend in 74, early 75, and back end of 73 actually as well. And a lot of people talk about John's sabbatical from 75 to 80 when he wasn't recording at all. People talk about George's lean years between Gone Troppo and Cloud 9 and after Cloud 9 through the 90s. But nobody really talks about Ringo's lost years, and actually they weren't too lost in terms of records. He was actually quite productive during this period, but the reason I've labelled them lost, apart from the fact that none of the records charted really, but that wasn't much of a surprise because Ringo hasn't really had a hit single since 1976, and certainly none of his latter day albums have been bothering the charts. But so commercially not a success, but artistically speaking I have a soft spot for these albums, and the reason is because I got into the Beatles in 1978 and Ringo was relatively active. Bad Boy, I remember, came out soon after I got into the Beatles, around about the same time as London Town from Wings. And then, I mean, there was a three-year gap until Stop and Smell the Roses in 81. But I was playing catch-up in 78, so I remember getting Rotogravure on cassette. And then I had Bad Boy on cassette. These are the days when cassettes were quite popular, and they soon went out of fashion when you realised you could tape your records onto cassette, which I guess people had been doing throughout the 70s, but I didn't have the means to do that initially. But I soon acquired the means to do that, and cassettes became redundant, and I started buying vinyl much more, and I got a record player. But the first music playing device I had was a small yellow portable cassette player, which is very handy for like taking in the car with you on long car journeys, annoying the rest of the family, playing my music, or just generally to have it at school, and have it. It was very portable and not heavy at all, not one of these massive ghetto blasters, we're talking this big, but not a bad sound, I seem to remember. Anyway, so the first, and the other reason I call this period lost is because Ringo has basically disowned it, to the extent where none of these albums I'm going to show you, with the exception of the last two which have appeared recently on Spotify, but up until recently none of these albums were available on Spotify, and certainly the first four albums I'm going to show you are still to this day not available. It's literally, he's blanked them from his memory. He says he can't remember, which may or may not be true. Probably can't remember great swathes of these years. But to disown these records completely is a little bit disappointing from my point of view, because I think there's a lot to recommend these albums, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Rotogravure from 1976, and this actually did give Ringo his last top 30 US hit single with A Dose of Rock and Roll. I think it got to 26 or 28, something like that. And it's a decent song written by Carl Grossman, sort of relative unknown on Ringo's own record label. Peter Frampton supplies a wonderful guitar solo, and the usual bunch of musicians appearing on this album: Dr. John, Klaus Voormann, Jim Keltner, and guest appearances from Paul McCartney and John Lennon. So I think this album has a lot to recommend it. And Nancy Andrews co-writes Crying on side one with Ringo, which is one of his best country ballads. And Paul McCartney's track Pure Gold is very nice as well, albeit quite schmaltzy, but nothing wrong with that. And a really good cover of Hey Baby, which was also a single. And I'm going to show you a few singles I picked up over the years. I picked this one up in Nice, and the guy in the record shop, I said, have you got any solo Beatles singles? And he dug this one out and he gave it to me for 50 cents. Little did he know I would have paid €4 or €5 for it, but anyway, shows the value he put on it. I think it's quite rare actually, and this one's quite rare, another French single, picture sleeve. A lot of these singles were not released in a picture sleeve in the UK, just the straight Polydor red label, but in France and in continental Europe they often came up with a good picture sleeve, and this is an alternative from the cover shoot, obviously, which is on the back. So very interesting, and that's another alternative from the cover shoot. This is a Yugoslav single. I think I did pay a bit more money for this, maybe €3 or €4. This is a German single of Hey Baby, but soon after Ringo, that famous instant where he was on the beach with Nancy and he said, I'm just going up to get my hair cut. And so he went, and Nancy tells the story brilliantly. So he went and says, yeah, can you shave my hair quite short? In fact, can you shave all of it off? And then can you shave my beard off too? Can you shave my eyebrows off? So he went back to the beach, and he'd been drinking absinthe apparently. And he went back to the beach, and Nancy was extremely shocked and not very pleased at all. But anyway, Ringo showed off his bald head in one of the videos for this album, You Don't Know Me At All. And this is the German single actually of the Hey Baby, which didn't do terribly well, unfortunately. So Rotogravure, underlooked. I don't think Cooking from John Lennon is a particularly strong composition. And I think I was listening to the complete. You can listen to the complete transcript of the Playboy interview on YouTube, and the entire stuff, not just the stuff in David Sheff's book. And I think there's a bit in that interview where he says, we went down to LA, and it was a very lackluster session, and the musicians weren't into it, and I felt a bit taken for granted, which I thought was interesting, because there's a spirit missing from Cooking in the Kitchen of Love. It's not a great track to begin with. And it's not a great performance, so I don't know why anyone would pick that out as a highlight from Rotogravure. This is a rarity called Scouse the Mouse, which came out in '77, and it's a kind of soundtrack to a sort of animated film with Adam Faith, who actually appeared in Stardust in the role that Ringo would have reprised, because he was second to David Essex in That'll Be the Day, but he refused to be in the follow-up. So Adam Faith took his place, and then Donald Pleasance is also on this album. But Ringo is singing a good chunk of the album, and some of it is, vintage Ringo. Like Running Free is a fine Ringo song. Living in a Pet Shop is quite good. Scouse the Mouse itself is okay. Ringo's not singing lead vocal on every track, I hasten to add, but this is very rare. If you ever see it, pick it up, unless it costs a fortune and came with this colouring in competition for the kids, which obviously I haven't coloured in. I've tried to keep it in as good condition as possible. So that was Scouse the Mouse. Then we got Ringo the Fourth, which probably gets slagged off more than any other Ringo album. He's looking pretty miserable there on the front, isn't he? But I think the album has a lot to recommend it, and I really like the band. I like the way he's changing musicians at this stage of his career, not keeping the same. For example, Jim Keltner, Klaus Voormann, nowhere to be seen. And he's using the services of people like Steve Gadd and Tony Levin and Richard T. And it makes for a very interesting diversion. And it's a bit disco-y, it's a bit au courant, but I think the material is pretty good, particularly some of the tracks that Ringo wrote with Vinnie Poncia. This is the picture I took of, or my friend Andy Brooks took of Ringo in December '87 outside his office in Kensington with Hilary Gerard. So anyway, I just keep that in there for safekeeping. This was the lead-off single from Ringo the Fourth, where he really is looking miserable indeed. Probably knowing that this song was not going to crack the charts. It duly didn't, and the video's nothing to write home about either. But this album, Bad Boy, probably in my first 5 albums I ever purchased. Remember, got it from Boots for about £3.49, I seem to remember, in the spring of '78, and comes with the lyrics, and rather annoyingly, it doesn't tell you who plays on the album. They're all under pseudonyms, but I've managed to work out Dr. John's on here, and Dee Murray, Elton John's bass player, is on here, and I forget who else plays on here. Ringo's playing the drums, not supported by anyone, I don't think, for once. It's a good back cover. So I got a lot of time for this album. I think Who Needs a Heart is top rate. I think Lipstick Traces is classic. I think Where Did Our Love Go is commendable. Heart on My Sleeve is a good cover, Gallagher and Lyle song. So yeah, I like Bad Boy. And then we've got a 3-year gap. And then when this album came out, I remember a lot of people slagging it off and saying, what is this? and I think it got voted worst album of the year, 1981. But, you know, we all went, us Beatles fans, you know, following the tragic death of John Lennon, pleased to have any solo Beatle album out. This came out in November of 81. And we were particularly pleased because Paul McCartney appeared on the record, as did George Harrison, playing guitar on a couple of tracks each. In fact, 3 tracks in the case of Paul. And John Lennon was scheduled to be on this album. Had he not died, he would have featured, but sadly not to be. But we've got 3 tracks from Paul, which none of which are very distinguished. Sorry, 2 tracks, and then he plays bass on Short of Fall. The Carl Perkins cover, which is probably easily the best track on the whole album, if I'm honest, in my opinion. Rack My Brain, the single from George Harrison, catchy but bit lightweight. And this was the single for Rack My Brain. Made a video to go with it, but it didn't help it chart-wise. And this is a very rare, I think this is a French Private Property single, which I picked up. I paid, what's that, around about £8 or £9 for this, so it's not cheap, but because I'd never seen it before, I thought, bloody hell, I better pick that one up. So that was 81. No chart action from Ringo since Rotogravure in 76 to speak of. So we've got 83 comes along, and he couldn't get a record release in any country apart from 3 countries in the world, Canada, Brazil and Germany. So this album, Old Wave, is supposedly a pun on the opposite of New Wave. This is a German pressing, and it's side 1 is excellent, and then side 2 starts off well and then goes downhill. But there's some really strong stuff, particularly on side 1. Joe Walsh is on hand to play most of the guitar, and they do some good covers of She's About a Mover, I keep forgetting. A nice track written by Ringo called Hopeless, and Be My Baby is a great song as well. So no problem with Old Wave at all, but as I say, a lot of people weren't even aware of it because it wasn't even released in the UK or the US. So this is a compilation which came out in 1989, round about the time that Ringo had finally given up the booze and hadn't quite started to announce this period, but he gave permission. This is an official release on Rhino. Gave permission for this album to come out, but he didn't help promote it or anything. And it's quite a neat compilation of the years 76 to 83. I mean, he hadn't recorded any albums since Old Wave, and he wasn't to do an album until Time Takes Time. So this was a good sort of thing to keep going, keep Ringo's name in the news, although it didn't do anything chart-wise. I must say that the track selection is a bit disappointing. They've gone for all the tracks written by George Harrison, John Lennon or Paul McCartney, even those, for example, Attention. Actually, I noticed Attention is not on the vinyl, but it is on the CD, which is interesting. I hadn't noticed that. Private Property is on here, which I don't think warranted inclusion. And Cooking in the Kitchen of Love certainly doesn't warrant inclusion. Interestingly, they dropped Drowning in the Sea of Love and put on Can She Do It Like She Dances from Ringo the Fourth, which I think is a better choice. Other than that, Hey Baby's on here, Dose of Rock and Roll, I'm pretty sure is on here. Better be, yes it is. In My Car, worthy choice. Who Needs a Heart, another extra track on the CD, which is interesting. I didn't realise there were sort of 16 tracks on the CD and only 12 on the vinyl. So what else is missing? I guess You Belong to Me is another extra track from here. Sorry, I hadn't really realised that until just now. And Short of Fall, well, that's on. Okay, so anyway. I quite like this album. This obviously is the aborted cover from Stop and Smell the Roses when the album was about to be called You Can't Fight Lightning, which is Ringo's remark when he first got together with Barbara and he had to explain to Nancy that their relationship was over. He basically said, you can't fight lightning, meaning, you know, we were meant to be, Barbara and I, and Nancy later on in her book took it quite well and said, yeah, it is special when the right person comes along, and she's quite happy these days. So anyway, so that was Ringo's lost period, as I call it. We've also got some TV appearances that he made during the late 70s, which are worth a watch on YouTube. He's sometimes drunk, sometimes not so drunk. There's one, I think it's a Dutch TV interview, where he actually cuts off half of the tie of the presenter, who takes it very well, I must say. And there's the famous interview with Tom Snyder in 81, where he's talking very sadly about John's death. There's a Michael Parkinson interview from 81. I'm not sure if that's on YouTube, but that's worth watching. And then obviously probably the happiest day out of this whole period is the April 81 Ringo Starr Barbara Bach wedding day ceremony in Marylebone in London, and they had a reception afterwards, and there's that joyous picture of George and his wife, Paul, and his wife Ringo, and his new bride posing for the picture. And then it was the front page of the Daily Express the next day with the headline "The Reunion," and I was chuffed to bits when that was really a tonic for the troops, as they say, when that came out. That was just 4 months after Lennon died, and we were all devastated, and then at least the other three were together and having their photo taken. So that was, I will defend these years, and a lot more than I can defend the latter day Ringo albums, which have become so homogenous that one really can't tell one from the other. But here, he's changing up musicians a bit. He's changing producers. He's varying the material that he uses. He's not using the same songwriter. He's even trying his hand at writing with Vinnie Poncia with some success, I would say. So Ringo's period 76 to 83, worth checking out. See you next time. Thanks for watching.